In the Inquiry Concerning Human Understanding, David Hume is going to take some of the points that were made by John Locke to their extreme and to their logical conclusion. Like John Locke, David Hume accepts the hyperbolic doubt of René Descartes. The hyperbolic doubt says that you cannot trust your sense experience. Why that is such an important starting point is that it is contrary to your common sense. For John Locke, ideas referred to all mental events, thoughts, sensations, perceptions, memories. David Hume uses a different word to signify all of these mental events. He refers to all ideas and all sensations as perceptions. And that is an important word because perception involves sense experience. The word itself comes from a Latin word that means to partake, because in sense experience, you are partaking in whatever object you are observing. When you look at a car or you look at a computer or a dog, that dog becomes part of you somehow. You form an image of the dog in your mind. So you have partaken of the dog. The dog has become part of you. Another way that you can partake of something is by eating something. If you eat a piece of pizza, that pizza will become part of you. But when you are looking at something, you are taking in whatever you're looking at, the dog or the computer, but you don't have to eat it. Your mind is doing the work. You are partaking of the object that you are viewing. This is sense perception. So David Hume wants to use the word perception to mean all ideas and impressions. So we can see just from the use of this word perception that David Hume is going to say that all ideas and all mental events are based on sense experience. David Hume, like John Locke, is an empiricist. One of the claims of the modern philosophers who were empiricists is that primary knowledge is gained by sense experience. But as with the philosopher John Locke, we have seen that there is some conflict with this attribution, because these modern philosophers like Hume and Locke, they begin with the hyperbolic doubt of Descartes. And the hyperbolic doubt of Descartes says you can't trust your sense experience. And so the default position that we see with John Locke and René Descartes is they claim it is the idea in their mind that they know first, and that physical object out there remains kind of hazy. David Hume, he is going to claim we don't even know what that idea is. David Hume begins by dividing all perceptions in the mind into two different kinds. One is called impressions, and the other one is ideas. What David Hume notices is that our impressions, they are very lively. They are very known at the time that they happen. Just think about maybe when you first burned your finger on a stove, or when maybe you got bitten by a red ant. That impression was very lively for you when it was happening. But now that you think about it, now that you've had some time in between that impression and now, maybe you burnt your finger 10 years ago, and when you think about it right now, is it as lively in your mind? Of course not. When it happened, that was the impression. When you think of it right now, that is the idea. This is the same for all sense impressions that you've had. When you touch something cold, the impression is real. You know it. It is lively. But when you think about the cold thing that you touched later on, hours later, days later, years later, it is not as real to you. It is not as lively. This is the conclusion that David Hume reaches. Impressions are lively. They are more lively and real than your ideas about the impressions. David Hume goes further and explains what these ideas are. If, for example, we have a complex idea, the complex idea is a notion that Hume borrows from John Locke. If we think about one of these complex ideas, like a golden mountain, we find that it can be separated. There are two more simple ideas in that complex idea, golden and mountain. And when we think about those two ideas, we can ultimately find the sense impression. So for golden, the obvious sense impression would be that bright gleam that hits your eyes from the gold itself. And we can likewise find the impressions, the sense impressions from a mountain. The point that David Hume is going to make is that the ideas that we have about things, like a golden mountain, they are composed of simpler ideas, and they are ultimately composed of sense impressions, because all ideas come from sense impressions. Remember that sense impressions are more lively than ideas. They are more lively than ideas because those are the things that are really known to you. The ideas are just copies upon copies of these sense impressions. And the further away an idea is from the sense impression, the less it is known. That is the key point here. So all the ideas, or any idea that you may have, the harder it is for you to find the sense impression, the less that idea is known. This is a rather spectacular point here, because there are many ideas in our mind where it would be difficult for us to find the sense impression. Think about some of the ideas that you have in your mind. What about the idea of justice? What about the idea of brotherhood? What about the idea of love? Where would the sense impression be for those things? Did you burn your finger on a stove and then the idea of justice popped in your mind? Of course not. Did you touch something cold and that's where you got the idea of love? No, we would have to do some heavy searching in order to find the sense impression of those ideas concerning the notion of substance. Here we see David Hume denying this notion of substance from Aristotle. And he's basing this denial on what Locke has to say about substance. John Locke assumed there was a substance holding up or underneath the primary and secondary qualities. David Hume does not make the assumption of John Locke. Think about the idea of substance. What would be the sense impression for substance? If we just isolate the notion of substance as not representing these physical things that we see in the world, what would be the sense impression of it? The idea of substance itself does not seem to be related to any sense impression. Because when Aristotle pointed out that there's primary substances in the world, he was using the word substance to stand for all individually existing things in the world, not some particular blue cold substance. And that is the requirement that David Hume has for this idea of substance. So what David Hume is ultimately denying here is that you can talk this way, this general way about the world. You cannot talk about physical reality in a general way. You cannot say that primary substances have qualities. Primary substances are active or passive. This abstract way of talking about the world is ultimately being denied by David Hume, because only those ideas where the sense impression is immediate are real and known. The importance of this point cannot be overemphasized. If we cannot have a realistic metaphysics, metaphysics is just our claims about reality. If we cannot say that there are primary substances in the world that have certain qualities and quantities, then how would we be able to study them? How would we be able to do physics? How would we be able to do biology and say that we are actually gaining knowledge? This is what David Hume is ultimately denying. And this is something that the later philosopher Immanuel Kant is going to have a problem with. He is going to notice that David Hume's philosophy is denying that we can make scientific progress, that we can know new information in a necessary and certain way. For Aristotle, a substance is an individually existing thing. For John Locke, a substance is a complex idea, and complex ideas are made of simple ideas. But the substance itself, it's a confused notion. John Locke is just assuming there is something underneath all of those primary and secondary qualities. And for Hume, he does not make that assumption. He does not assume that there is an underlying thing underneath the qualities of something. For you and for me and for people of ordinary common sense, we assume what Aristotle assumes. When you look at a coffee mug or you look at your computer, you see an individually existing thing. Yeah, you see color. When you look at coffee, you see the color of coffee. If you look at your coffee mug, you see that it has the color white and the color blue. And you also see that those qualities belong to the thing itself. They belong to the individually existing thing, the substance, the primary substance of the coffee mug. That is the common sense position. That is the position that allows for scientific investigation and for learning.